One of the most confusing moments in a narcissistic relationship is not when they are cruel, not when they ignore you, not when they gaslight you. It's when they suddenly become kind again, when they start acting like the person you fell in love with. The affection returns, the attention returns, the softness returns. And for a moment, you feel hope again. You start thinking, maybe they changed. Maybe things can be different now. But what most people don't realize is that this moment often appears for a very specific psychological reason. And understanding that reason can completely change the way you see the relationship. If you've been in a relationship with a narcissist, you probably know this emotional cycle very well. There were moments when they felt distant, cold, unreachable. You tried to talk, to explain how you felt, to repair the connection. But somehow the conversation always turned around. Suddenly, you were the one apologizing, even when you didn't understand what you had done wrong. Days would pass, sometimes weeks, and the emotional distance felt unbearable. You started missing the person they used to be, the one who once made you feel special, safe, seen. And then, just when you were starting to emotionally detach, something unexpected happened. They became kind again, gentle, affectionate. Maybe they sent a sweet message. Maybe they planned something thoughtful. Maybe they looked at you the way they used to in the beginning. And suddenly your heart softened again. Hope returned. But here's the part most people don't understand. This moment is rarely random, because there is a psychological trigger that often causes this sudden shift. And once you see it, you will never experience these moments the same way again. But to understand it, we need to go back to the very beginning of the relationship. Most narcissistic relationships begin in a very intense way. The connection feels powerful, almost magical. They seem deeply interested in you. They ask about your dreams, your fears, your past. They mirror your personality, your values, your interests. You feel understood in a way you may have never experienced before. And slowly, your emotional world starts attaching to them. You begin associating them with safety, connection, excitement. But what many survivors later realize is that this early intensity was not simply love. It was emotional conditioning. Because once that deep emotional attachment is created, the dynamic begins changing. The affection slowly becomes inconsistent. One day they are warm, the next day they are distant. One moment they are loving, the next moment they are irritated or cold. And this unpredictability creates something powerful inside the brain. A psychological pattern known as intermittent reinforcement. The same mechanism used in gambling. You never know when the reward will come. But when it does, it feels incredibly powerful. And this is why the kind moments feel so meaningful, so hopeful, so emotionally intense. But here's where the deeper pattern begins. Over time, something starts happening inside you. Even if you don't notice it immediately, you start becoming emotionally exhausted, confused, drained. The constant ups and downs begin taking a toll on your nervous system. You start questioning things. Your patience becomes thinner. Your tolerance slowly decreases. And sometimes, without even realizing it, you begin emotionally pulling away. Maybe you stop explaining yourself so much. Maybe you stop chasing their attention. Maybe you stop reacting to their distance. And this is the moment when something very interesting can happen. Because narcissists are extremely sensitive to changes in emotional supply. Here's the part most people don't understand. Narcissists are not always consciously manipulating every situation, but they are highly attuned to one thing: attention, emotional reaction, validation. When those things begin decreasing, their internal alarm often activates. Suddenly they feel something shifting, something slipping. something they may not fully understand, but they sense it. And this is often the moment when they become nice again. They may suddenly become attentive, more affectionate, more engaged. They may start saying things like, "I miss how we used to be. You mean a lot to me. I don't want to lose you." And hearing these words can be incredibly powerful because they awaken the memory of who you thought they were. The person you once believed in, the person you once trusted, and for a moment, it feels real again. But this is where emotional clarity becomes important, because this kindness often appears not when the relationship is healthy, but when they feel your emotional distance growing. Maybe you were quieter than usual. Maybe you stopped arguing. Maybe you stopped trying to fix everything. Maybe you started focusing more on yourself, your work, your friends, your healing. And that emotional shift may have been subtle, almost invisible, but to someone who relied on your emotional energy, it can feel very noticeable. And this is why the sudden kindness appears. Not necessarily because the relationship is transforming, but because the dynamic is shifting. Take a moment and think back. Were there times when they became incredibly kind? Right when you were feeling ready to walk away? Right when you felt emotionally done? Right when you started creating distance? For many survivors, the answer is yes, and realizing this can be deeply emotional because it reveals something painful, but also something empowering. The kindness itself may not be fake. The emotions they express in those moments may even feel genuine to them, but the pattern surrounding those moments is what matters. Because if the kindness only appears when you begin pulling away and disappears once you reconnect, then it is not true emotional stability. It is part of a cycle that keeps hope alive, just enough to keep the relationship going. And this is why breaking free from this dynamic can feel so difficult, because the loving moments remind you of the beginning. They remind you of who you believed they were. They create the feeling that the relationship can still be saved. But healing begins when you start observing patterns. Not just moments. Moments can be emotional, but patterns reveal truth. And sometimes the moment you begin noticing these patterns is also the moment the confusion starts fading. Because for a long time, the relationship may have felt like an emotional puzzle. One day they seem loving, the next day they seem distant, then suddenly kind again, then cold again. And your mind kept searching for the explanations. And maybe you thought, maybe they're just stressed. Maybe I misunderstood something. Maybe if I communicate better, things will stabilize. But the deeper truth many survivors eventually discover is this. The kindness was never the full picture. It was one piece of a repeating cycle. And cycles are powerful because they create emotional memory. Your brain remembers the warmth, the closeness, the feeling of being wanted again. And when those moments appear, even briefly, they can reactivate the same hope you felt in the beginning. But here's something very important that often happens during healing. The emotional intensity of those moments begins to change. At first, the kindness may feel overwhelming. It pulls you back in immediately. But later, something different begins happening. You notice the kindness, but you also remember the pattern. You remember the distance that came before it. You remember the silence, the confusion, the emotional exhaustion. And this awareness creates a quiet pause inside you. A moment where you no longer react automatically. You observe, you reflect, you question. And that pause may seem small, but psychologically it represents something incredibly important. It means the emotional spell of the cycle is starting to weaken, because narcissistic dynamics rely heavily on emotional immediacy, immediate reactions, immediate forgiveness, immediate emotional reconnection. But when you begin introducing space, reflection, Awareness. The cycle begins losing its speed. And once that speed slows down, clarity has room to appear. And the moment you begin seeing those patterns clearly, something inside you begins changing. Your emotional reactions become slower. Your perspective becomes sharper. You stop chasing the brief moments of kindness, and you begin prioritizing something much more important. Consistency, emotional safety, peace. And that shift can feel incredibly powerful because it means you are reconnecting with yourself again. Your needs, your boundaries, your intuition. If you have experienced this cycle, please understand something important. The confusion you felt was not weakness. The hope you held on to was not foolish. You were responding to a very powerful psychological dynamic. A dynamic designed around emotional highs and emotional withdrawal. But awareness changes everything because once you begin recognizing the pattern, you begin reclaiming your power, and healing becomes possible, one step at a time. If this video helped you understand something about your past relationship, consider subscribing. This channel exists for one reason: to help you understand what happened and to help you heal and move forward. You survived the relationship. Here, we help you survive it too. And if you've ever wondered why narcissists seem to move on so quickly, the next video on this channel explains exactly why they replace people so fast.